To the theater. Fourscore and 20 years ago. Oh, here we are. Oh, I sure hope John Wilkes Booth isn't here in the theater. Oh! Civil War? More like Civil Bore, am I right? I was all hyped up for Ulysses S. Grant versus Robert E. Lee, not Mary Jane Watson versus Ron Swanson. This is just textbook false advertising, and Alex Garland is a hack, and this movie sucks. And I'm officially over this bit. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Retro RoboBoy channel, where today we're talking about Civil War, the new A24 film directed by Alex Garland. This movie has had a lot of buzz, a lot of hype, and I remember when I first saw the trailer come out, my gut reaction was very negative. My first impression of the movie was that it was going to be this, Purge-like scenario, and it's just going to be this mean-spirited thing just to stir up people and take advantage and be exploitative of the strife and the tension that we have in this country right now. But what ended up saving it for me and making me do a complete 180 was the fact that, one, it was being produced by A24, but two, that it was being directed by Alex Garland. I have loved Alex Garland for quite a while now, and I think the first movie I saw of his without even realizing it was 28 Days Later. He was a writer on 28 Days Later, as well as a co-writer on 28 Weeks Later, and both of those movies are absolutely excellent. He also was a writer on Sunshine, which is another film that I think is grossly underrated. He was a writer on the film Dredd, starring Carl Urban, and he actually was a co-director on that film, even though he wasn't credited. But most of you probably know him from his film Ex Machina, or my personal favorite, Annihilation. Annihilation is one of those movies that unfortunately flew under the radar for me whenever it first came out in theaters, but whenever I did get around to watching it, it blew my mind. And I'm not afraid to say it, it's probably in my top 10 favorite movies. And unfortunately, I never got around to seeing Men, which was the last film he directed before this, and I know that had very mixed reviews, and so hopefully I'll be able to watch that sometime here soon. But for the most part, I have adored Alex Garland's body of work, and I really hope to read some of his novels as well. I just think he's a very talented writer. I think he plays with very interesting themes, and he just has such a wonderful vision and such an eye as a director. So knowing that he was the head of this project and that he was a writer on this project made me completely drop any doubts in regards to it being this, gross, exploitative, purge-like movie where, let's just have liberals and conservatives tear each other apart on screen so people in the audience can clutch their pearls and get all upset. But regardless of my confidence in Alex Garland as director, there still was quite a bit of mystery as to what really the movie was about on a more detailed level and what was going to happen in the film. I mean, obviously, it's a civil war set in modern day, but there's a lot of different ideas you could play with there. It was getting good reviews from the film festivals. However, it wasn't long after that when I got out of the movie, I saw just how divided and mixed people were on the movie, which is ironic because the film's about Civil War. So let's just get into it. Set in an alternate near-future United States, the film follows the journey of four journalists as they make their way from New York City to Washington, D.C. in the midst of an all-out American Civil War. Lee, played by Kirsten Dunst, is a war photographer veteran who has seen the horrors of war her whole career, while Jessie, played by Kaylee Spaney, is a young and inexperienced photographer hoping to live up to her idol by tagging along on this dangerous road trip. They are joined by Lee's longtime collaborator, Joel, played by Wagner Moura, as well as a friendly senior rival journalist, Sammy, played by Stephen McKinley Henderson. They are risking their lives to get the true story from the front lines in hopes of being the first journalists to reach the tyrannical president and document the true story behind this great American tragedy. I'm going to state this right now that the overwhelming majority of this review I will stay spoiler-free. However, in order to delve into some of my gripes, I'm definitely going to have to get into spoiler territory, but I will mark on the screen when that happens. So in the meantime, let's just address the biggest issue that people seem to have with this film, and something that I think took a lot of us by surprise, even though it was something touched on before the movie came out. And that's the fact that this movie is shockingly apolitical considering the subject matter. I mean, hell, I think Barbie was more political than this movie. And just to be very clear, I am not saying that this movie is not political at all. It is, in fact, very political, and most art is political. I am, however, speaking in relation to American politics, and specifically the divide between Republicans and Democrats, which is what most were expecting when going into this movie. I hope I have made this clear. Thank you, and have a great day. While some people could argue that this would be a spoiler, I actually don't think this is a spoiler at all, and honestly, if you know this going in, I think it will make your experience a lot less jarring. And that's the fact that they really don't tell you exactly why this war started, and they tell you what the different factions are. You have the Florida Alliance, the Loyalists, and then you have the Western Forces, which is, surprise, surprise, a joining of Texas and California, which immediately broke a lot of people's suspension of disbelief before they even went to go see the movie. And while I totally get it as a Texan myself, who's also been to California several times, I actually think that given the context in the movie, what very little we're given, it kind of makes sense. It's established in this movie that the president is a tyrannical asshole and that he had drone strikes on civilians. He found a way to manipulate the system, get himself a third term, and ultimately, when you really, really think about it, right, Texas and California are arguably the two most powerful states in the United States. The idea of the military bases and the local governments seceding and linking up to battle a common enemy, I really don't think is that far-fetched. And honestly, if you just talk to people in both states, especially if, you go all over, you'd be shocked how similar the two actually are. I mean, don't get me wrong, yes, one is still, again, significantly more liberal, with the other being a lot more conservative. But as far as your average Joe goes, it's really not that far of a stretch to believe, especially with the strong Mexican influence in both, that the two states would be able to pretty quickly link up, use their strong power and influence to push back against these loyalist states. You're not really given that much context, and I think that a lot of people find that incredibly frustrating, because regardless of the fact that we always say, oh, we don't like political movies, stop putting politics in movies. If you're going to put politics in a movie about a modern day civil war, something that a lot of people think could happen, is something that you would want to have some amount of commentary. But I would argue that this movie actually has more commentary than you might think. It's just not on the surface. It's more subtext, and it's not very loud about it, because ultimately this movie really is about wartime journalism. More specifically, war photographers, and the trauma that comes with that, the desensitization to violence that comes with that. And there's a great line from Kirsten Dunst's character where she says, I went out, go into these wars, take these photos to send a message back home, to not bring this here, to not do this back home. Yet here we are. And that's really what the movie is about. There's a lot of crazy assholes who genuinely have this thirst for blood and for a civil war, and believe that we are so fractured and so damaged that it's inevitable. I mean, they did a poll not that long ago where it said something like 40% of Americans believe that a civil war is a likelihood. Now, me personally, I'm not going to say it's impossible for a civil war to happen, but I do think that, again, this is my personal opinion, I honestly think that Americans are far too complacent with the system to really give enough shits to actually form up enough of a militia to actually make any amount of meaningful change. Look at how many incredibly divisive laws and super controversial decisions our government has made. And you get, a few little protests here and there, maybe some tear gas and batons come out, but for the most part, people kind of just settle back into their comfort. As long as people have their football games, and, they have their barbecues, they have their video games, they have their concerts, whatever. As long as people have this, veil of comfort, the government can do almost anything, and it feels like no one really gives a shit. Most of the discourse and anger really just comes from the safety and protection of people online, but when you actually talk to people one-on-one, most people are a lot more even-tempered, and you don't have that super high polarization. I really do think that the internet gives a very, very, very skewed idea of what American people are actually like. And I really think that a lot of this toxicity and anger and discourse really is construed from, again, that wall, that safety of the anonymous internet persona. And I think when people get stuck in these echo chambers and people are fueled by this confirmation bias, before you know it, you have super extremist views that really aren't based in anything real or anything that's actually going to affect people's lives. But at the end of the day, I do think that the most meaningful change does come from the bottom up. It doesn't come from the top down. I'm not saying that the president doesn't matter or that voting doesn't matter. I'm not saying that at all, but I'm just saying that, the most you're going to be able to truly change and affect and directly have a hand in is your local government. It starts from your city, and then your county, and then your state. So, when it comes to the reality of an American Civil War, I don't see that shit happening unless we have a president that really is that batshit insane and starts drone striking citizens. Then yeah, maybe something like that could start. But for the most part, I think this movie is more so an exaggeration of the turmoil in this country, and more so just a cautionary tale about a nation eating itself from the inside out, and again about that dehumanization, and ultimately here we go. War is bad. Yeah, I know. Do we really need someone to tell us this? No. But I guess the real question here is, does the style elevate the substance? Can you give tired old themes a new coat of paint? I guess it really depends on how much a movie's atmosphere and visual storytelling appeals to you as opposed to the actual narrative. And for as much as people wanted Alex Garland to pick a side, this would inevitably alienate half the audience and kind of go against the theme of the whole movie. And while American politics may change, making the movie more neutral and more about war itself allows the film to actually age better over time. Like a lot of people, I felt a little conflicted about this film, and I think a lot of that comes down to the preconceived ideas and the expectations that I had, and I think a lot of people had going in. The movie opens with a very sobering behind-the-scene look at the president reciting his lines before he goes on TV, and you can almost tell that he doesn't even believe the own bullshit that's coming out of his mouth, and it's just yet another routine he has to do to stir up the anger and to fuel the propaganda to support him. We are quickly introduced to Kirsten Dunst's character, Lee, who is this very hardened and very broken woman who just has seen so much traumatic shit. We get a montage of just some of the things she's seen during her war photography, and it's pretty fucked. I'm not gonna lie, it was almost mesmerizing because of the way in which it's shot. There's a lot of very beautiful slow motion, and even though what's happening on the screen is very traumatic, very twisted, there's just elegance to the way it's all put together. And see what she's seen, seeing that glimpse of what is to come really, really lets you kind of feel the angst and also feel fear for the other character that's introduced, played by Kaylee Spaney, named Jessie. And Jessie is a very young, new photographer who is absolutely in love, just fangirling over Lee. And when they're introduced, it's right in the heat of this super crazy, super messed up suicide bombing. And, Jessie is completely shocked, but Lee has seen this shit again and again, so she's just going right in there, right in the action, taking pictures of bodies. It's incredibly realistic looking. Everyone in the theater was gasping, but it really sends this shock to your system, and again, it just gets you geared up and ready for this absolute hell of a road trip that you're about to go on, because that's really what this movie is. It's a fucked up road trip movie, similar to something like The Road. Or another movie that this kind of reminded me of, that's one of my favorites, is Children of Men. I see a lot of people comparing this to Apocalypse Now and a few other movies, but Children of Men, I think tonally, and the tempo of that film very much reminded me of this, or vice versa. This reminded me of that film. Wagner Moura plays our other main character, Joel, who has been partners with Lee for a very long time. And this is a character that I think will be a lot of people's favorites, because he's very cool, very laid back, but still very serious journalist. Now, his character wasn't a photographer. He was, I believe, just what I could only assume was a text-based journalist. His character, again, while just as, experienced as Lee, still had this more kind of almost laid back and adventurous spirit. He definitely was an adrenaline junkie and really liked, getting in the shit. And his character was very fun to watch on screen, and I think kind of helped balance out the cast, and honestly just felt very real. And as a quick side note, there's a scene in this movie where his character goes through something incredibly upsetting, very traumatic. And I know this might sound kind of lame, but I was just really happy to see a scene that shows a more realistic and naked expression of what it really looks like to have a mental breakdown. There's just so many movies where the male characters either just get all gruff, or they'll shed one tear, or they'll scream up in the air, no, and it's all cheesy and shit. And just when you're this upset, it's not pretty, it's really ugly, and it's really humbling. And I'm just happy to see more depictions of men in movies just freaking the fuck out and having just a normal fucking reaction to really fucked up shit, which is another thing I really liked about Children of Men as well. But my personal favorite character, and the character that I think was just the absolute goat of this movie, was Sammy, played by the wonderful Stephen McKinley Henderson. Anything that Stephen McKinley Henderson is in is a banger. Even if the movie's not a banger, he's one of the best parts in it. And he just had such a warmth to him, and he had this, very almost fatherly, wisdom to him. And he's a journalist from an opposing branch or network. They don't really go that deep into it, but it's kind of hinted that they have this playful rivalry, and they pick on him the whole movie because he's this old man that he's kind of limping around. But it was so much of the comedy in this film, which, yes, there is comedy in this film. It's a lot more subtle, a lot more dry, a lot more naturalistic. And I think he just brought a lot of humanity to this, because Kirsten Dunst's character is a lot more stoic and just closed off. And then you have, of course, the young kid, and you have this other guy who's, kind of cool and laid back, still a bit crazy and a little too into the deep end. But you have this character, Sammy, again, who is still a professional and still, again, in this traumatic shit. But he just brought, again, this level of humanity that I think really elevated this movie. And I think he had the most amount of range, without a doubt. And if he wasn't in this movie, I don't think it would be nearly as good. So our characters decide that they're going to go from New York City all the way to Washington, D.C., and then trek across this war-torn hellscape that is the Civil War of the United States. And against Lee's better judgment, it's decided that Jessie is going to join them on this road trip and get her first experience in war photography. And there's this beautiful contrast and also parallel between Lee and Jessie, and that Jessie very much is a younger version of Lee. And Lee, even though she's pushing back and doesn't want this kid to join them, she does see herself in her. And that's, I think, so much of where that fear is coming from, and that she doesn't want this girl to be corrupted and turn into this. Even though she sees this job as important and realizes the stakes, she still has this hesitance. And it's almost like she's trying to save herself in that way, because you can tell, even though she's willing to do anything to get the shot and she's in it and willing to risk her life, there's a part of her that almost seems like she wishes she could go back, or there's just this great conflict in her. And of course, Sammy also sees that in her, and he tells her, you were that age when you started, you're doing this, so why can't she? I think so much of the character dynamics in this film really is about generational loop, that kind of coming of age story baked into this much larger epic tale. Lee is seen the whole film using color digital camera, a modern camera with a bunch of different lenses that she's switching throughout. And sometimes she's using it literally as a scope to see if there's any enemies ahead. And all her photos and snapshots are in color. While Jessie, however, is developing on actual film, and it's black and white film. So you have the older veteran using modern technology, while you have the younger, newer generation using old technology. And I found that very, very interesting. One has an idolization of the old, while the other just uses the most quick, clean, and efficient and high quality way to get the job done. And so you have this romantic naivete versus this cold, clean, hardened veteran. And I think now would be a great time to mention how they actually handle the photography. There are a lot of scenes in this movie where there is just intense, crazy, scary, loud, visceral action happening on screen. But as the characters snap their photo, it goes dead silent, and just for a few seconds, sometimes even only a few frames, it seems like, you see the photo they took in that moment. And it brings this realism, and you really kind of have this idea of how many photos have you seen in your life of famous historic moments that really were just this tiny moment in this much, much larger story. No matter how good a photo is, you never can truly capture everything that went on in that moment, and just the power of imagery and manipulating images to provoke an emotion. And with these journalists, their job is not to question, their job is to just capture so someone else can question. And I really liked the implementation of photography intercut with the actual scenes. It made them far more powerful, and I think just lends to the style of the movie. If I had one complaint about the journalism aspect of this movie, it's the fact that Joel's character, while it's stated that he's not a photojournalist, you never see him with a recorder or with a video camera or he doesn't have like a legal pad where he's jotting shit down or a journal. It seems like he's just strictly observing. And that kind of bothered me because I felt like, why even be there in the first place? I mean, you could just make shit up. You know what I mean? So I would have liked to see his character take a bigger part in the more journalistic aspect. But I think, again, they wanted to focus on the two female leads of the film, and that dynamic took priority in the story. And I have to give this movie so much credit for how morally gray our protagonists are. Man, there are some scenes where some really twisted, really horrific shit happens, and within minutes after these things are happening, people are laughing and giving high fives and just hanging out, smoking weed, having a good time. And it's just really insane, but also completely human and understandable that these characters would detach so quickly from the horror they're seeing, because if they wouldn't be able to survive. And the film's action scenes always feel, not too crazy to where you're disoriented, but just crazy, just chaotic enough to keep you on the edge of your seat. Not to sound pretentious, but when it comes to action, I much, much prefer the more kind of dry, slow, methodical, action out of something like Bill Hader's Barry, which I know is the weirdest reference, but if you've ever seen the show Barry, starring and written and directed by Bill Hader, the gunplay in that show, to me, is more intense, more exciting, and more scary than anything that a movie like John Wick could offer. And it's almost an apples to oranges comparison. One is a lot more fun, a lot more playful, but one just hits a little too close to home. And this film does an excellent job of having, something more akin to something like Saving Private Ryan than something like Michael Bay. But the movie takes the darkest turn when they introduce Jesse Plemons. And I know everyone saw in the trailer, it's the famous "What kind of American are you" speech. And that scene is going to go down in history as one of the most suspenseful moments of any film. I mean, it makes you want to projectile vomit and shit. It's so miserable and just so demented. And I don't want to spoil it, but trust me, when you see it, there's another element at play that's not shown in the trailer that just makes it 100 times worse. And then the way they set it up with the characters walking up, to see their friends on the ground being held at gunpoint, and there's this big reveal, and you're like, oh fuck, this sucks. You're like, this is awful. I honestly thought they really make you think, anyone is dead at any time, and no one is safe. It's hard for a movie with such a star-studded cast to make you feel that way, but this movie does. You really feel like at any moment these people are just going to get slaughtered. It's going to be the end. No more story. Goodbye. And this is made all the more ironic by the fact that Kirsten Dunst and Jesse Plemons are married in real life. I don't know how awkward or how insane this scene must have been for them to shoot, but from what I heard, Jesse Plemons actually did it as a favor to Kirsten Dunst and to Alex Garland, because whoever was going to play that role of that soldier wasn't able to do it. And honestly, I don't know who that other actor was, but I'm almost glad they dropped out, because Jesse Plemons, he's just way too good at playing a sleazy, creepy, scary asshole, which, no offense. Obviously, I think Jesse Plemons is probably an absolute sweetheart, but he's just so good at playing that despicable monster. And I really think that, even if you don't love this whole movie as a whole, you got to give it up for these scenes that just have the most palpable pin drop tension. Even though I don't think these characters have a whole lot of character traits, and the movie really doesn't have super strong characters, there's just enough moments of humanity and just enough moments for me personally to be able to attach to it a little bit. By the time they actually get to the White House, it almost feels like they fast traveled in a way, because they jump from moment to moment so quickly. And even though I'm happy with what we got, it almost feels like this movie could have used another 10, even 20 minutes of runtime to kind of fill things out a little bit more and just give you a little bit more to chew on. It's got strong themes and strong ideas, but the execution is just a little bit messy. The ending scene was incredibly exciting, loud as fuck, and very intense, and it had some beautiful imagery, and you could really see, the money put into these scenes. The visual effects are awesome, and there's something just so harrowing about these famous American monuments being destroyed. I know we've seen it 1,000 times in things like Independence Day and even Olympus Has Fallen and all these big, dumb, Roland Emmerich action flicks and Michael Bay films, but there's something different about seeing it be American on American violence. I don't know why, but on a psychological level, it just felt a lot more real. It was more reminiscent of like 9/11, than it was Godzilla or something like that, if you know what I mean. So, that ending raid scene was pretty intense, but I still found myself feeling slightly underwhelmed, because it just felt like we got to that moment so quick, having a lot of missing context about this war. And again, having these stops on this road trip feel so segmented and separated, just for me, made the pacing feel way too quick. And I guess it's better to be left wanting more than to have things drag on. But, it's something minor, and I think something that might frustrate a lot of people who, again, were expecting more political discourse. But this is a moment when I have to come clean and admit a bias, something that I'm so embarrassed to admit. But I just gotta say it, for whatever reason, even though I'm very much a pacifist, and even though I think so many war films are just straight up U.S. military propaganda and basically glamorize war, for whatever dumb reason, I love war media, especially fictional war media. I mean, if you've watched any of my other videos, I'm a huge Mobile Suit Gundam fan. I love, Mecha. I've been playing Helldivers nonstop. I love Starship Troopers. I love World War II movies. And I think what's so appealing to me about war media is the fact that, you can have these crazy, exciting action scenes like you would in a science fiction film. However, with the context of knowing this is part of our reality, and perhaps it's because I'm privileged and live in a comfortable place where I've never had to experience war or see it up close. But similar to horror films, it's almost a way to approach a dark, scary subject within the comfort and safety of your own home. And I think there is such thing as going too far and essentially just creating trauma porn, and that's just way too exploitative. And I also think that it's very easy to set out to make an anti-war film, but accidentally making a pro-war film because you have soldiers bonding over war and creating these strong relationships, or you have, the theme of sacrifice or the hero who dies to save his country. These ideas that really are very dangerous and very poisonous, and that heroic figure and that war hero archetype really honestly is just straight up bullshit. I mean, wars are waged by the old but fought by the young, and that's one great thing about this movie, is that I can confidently say this is anti-war. At no point do you ever feel like a death is justified. It's never glamorized. It's always very quick, very violent, and not glamorous at all. It's always ugly, and this whole movie just honestly kind of makes you feel sick. Why do I enjoy that? I don't know. Maybe I'm a psycho, but there is something oddly cathartic about embracing that dark side of humanity, and again, there's a certain meditation that comes with it, and accepting that this is a part of our reality, and the importance of recognizing the value of life and how much war devalues people's lives. When the ending credits rolled, I felt pretty conflicted, but at the same time, I can't say that I didn't thoroughly enjoy every minute of this film. Even though there are some elements that I don't think are strong, the elements that are strong, which is the cinematography, the sound, the use of music, the acting, and the just overall performances, for me, were strong enough, and it catered to enough of the themes and things that I enjoy and the things that I like in stories, that I had an overall very positive, I would say great experience with this movie. And I think it's actually going to be a film where the more I rewatch it, the more I enjoy it, the more that I get out of it. It's not just a shallow, dumb action movie, but it also leaves just a little bit to be desired. I think going just a little too vague ultimately hurt it, even though I think what it was setting out to do was commendable. I think it's a great sign that when after you see a movie, you can't stop thinking about it. I've seen 4 movies this month, and I know I the other 3 I should have reviewed before putting this video out, but I'll get around to it, or maybe I won't. But even though I've seen 4 movies, this is the one I can't stop talking about and can't stop thinking about, and that's a really good sign. That means I liked it. So I think, oh boy, what I'm going to give this. There's parts of this movie that are really high, like really high highs, but there's, again, it's the full package that I think is just a little rocky, just because of how much I enjoyed it. I think for a lot of people, this movie might be close to a 6, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give Civil War an 8 out of 10. Yes, I know that's pretty high considering the amounts of criticisms I had for this movie, but again, the elements that I liked that much. It stimulated, my mind, and that's really what movies are meant to do, at least in my opinion. As the great Shia LaBeouf said, anything that moves you is art. Just go in with knowing that, it's not going to explain everything. It's not going to be this super smart commentary about American politics. It is a lot more broad in what it's saying, and I still think it's worth the watch. But with that out of the way, let me touch on the one spoiler that I wanted to talk about. The weird, broken, I don't want to say character arc, but I guess character change of Lee, Kirsten Dunst's character. So it's established at the beginning that she, has a lot of PTSD and traumatic shit. She's seen it all. She's seen the worst of the worst that humanity has to offer, and she's essentially become this very cold, calculated, passive observer who's able to detach herself from that violence. And at some point, I don't know what the inciting incident is. If you can put it in the comments, if anyone has any insight into this, just make sure you put a spoiler warning, obviously for other people. But why her character suddenly started having like major PTSD and then having those freeze ups. They made such a point point to acknowledge that she doesn't feel, any of this shit, and that she's able to shut that part of herself off. Yet, for whatever reason, it starts getting to her. I don't know if it has to do with the president or what it is. What element was it that was making her start to shut down at the end? Because of course you have Joel, trying to shake her, like, hey, get your head in the game. Like, we're here, we're at the White House or whatever. And you have Jesse, who of course has the biggest character arc of becoming her replacement, obviously, and her sacrificing herself for her. It almost felt like Alex Garland needed a way to transition from her being cold and detached to being willing to sacrifice herself for the next generation. And so I guess the only headcanon I can put is that maybe she secretly had a death wish and wanted to die, and she found a way out subconsciously through Jesse, and basically relieved herself of the responsibility by passing it on to Jesse, and it's literally a job that is so important to her, it's worth dying for. And thematically that makes sense, but I just gotta say again, seeing her character switch on a dime, and suddenly in that last scene being frozen up, all traumatized, not able to move, it felt way too sudden. I think would have worked a lot better if they just fleshed it out a bit more. And another scene that I kind of like but also kind of don't is Nick Offerman's last scene, which, number one, Nick Offerman is in this movie for 5 minutes. He's essentially a non-character. He's a cameo. I don't even know why they casted him. I actually think it would have been better if they had casted, an unknown. It was almost distracting. I almost couldn't see a president. I just saw Nick Offerman. But whenever he's on his back and they're about to take him out, and Joel comes over and he's like, hey, do you have any last words? Give me a statement. And he just says, please don't kill me. He cowers the same way, terrorist or dictator or any other figure would in their last moments. And he says, oh yeah, that's good enough. And I'm like, so you're not going to record that? You're not going to film that? This super important historical moment? You're not going to fucking, get out pen and paper like I said earlier? It just was weird to me that suddenly he gets all vindictive and personal with it, and is all snooty and kind of ironic. It makes sense for us as an audience, but within the context of the actual scene, I'm like, no, you want to actually document that. You don't want hearsay. Oh yeah, I was there when the president died and he just said this. It's like, no, dude, you're a journalist. You're a documentarian of history. That moment right before they shot the president should have been recorded in some way, shape, or form. And it just kind of bugged me. Again, it felt satisfying to hear him cower. And again, it kind of went back to something that Sammy said earlier in the film, that, he's like, you're going to try and get all these questions in, but you're probably going to be disappointed. So, it was set up in that way. But again, just realistically speaking, he should be recording this. You know what I'm saying? So those were the two big things in the movie that I think stuck out to me the most. They weren't big enough to bring down all the other elements that worked for me. Because 8 out of 10, that's pretty high. That's a pretty high score considering how much criticism I gave it. But I didn't want to just sit here the whole time and be like, oh, it's so beautiful. Oh, the sound design is so great. And just say the same shit over and over. I wanted to kind of get in to more of the details and the things that I think a lot of people are going to question. I think a lot of people would rather talk about. But with all that off my chest, I think I'm going to steer away from all this doom and gloom. Coming up next, I have a few projects that I think are going to be a little bit more fun, a little bit more goofy. So I hope that, all the new subscribers stick around to see it through. So thank you so much for subscribing. I hope you enjoyed the movie. Please let me know what you thought. Please add on to anything I mentioned or give me your perspective, because I'm very curious to see how other people felt about this movie. And I hope to see you back here again soon. Thank you so much for watching.
There's some kind of misunderstanding here. What? Well, you're American, okay?
Okay. What kind of American are you?
Oh! Now you fucked up!
You don't know?
Now you fucked up! Now you fucked up! You have fucked up now! Now you fucked up! 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 Now you have fucked up.
Mr. President, will you please be quiet?
Suck my presidential cock, bitch.